Good afternoon. I'm Susan Arrayes. I know a number of you, but I am the publisher of Seniors Blue Book of Greater Boston. And today I'm thrilled to be partnering with Aileen Gerhardt, who is a certified patient advocate and founder of Beacon Pacement Solutions, and Kathleen Summers, who is a nurse and a lawyer and the co-founder of Generations Law. Today's the first part of a two-part series on solo agers. Today we'll cover who is a solo ager, what are the challenges and opportunities for solo agers, and considerations for a plan. At the end of the call, we'll give you a little homework, and then when we get together for the second part, we'll discuss how to develop your plan and what resources are available for you. Our goal is to empower you to make decisions that'll impact your life going forward and hopefully lighten your concerns. For those on the call as professionals or friends of a solo ager, we hope you'll be able to take this information and also help to empower solo agers. So, Kathleen and Aileen, thanks for being here today and joining us. Can we start with some statistics on seniors? Aileen, I think you might have a slide on that for us.
Sure. So thanks for joining us today. It's a beautiful sunny day, although cold, and thank you for spending some of your afternoon with us to chat about this important topic about which I am quite passionate. So when it comes to seniors, we know that folks prize their independence, and that can both be an attitude that creates a barrier to providing or receiving support. Here's what we know. We know about 92-ish million older adults, 55 plus, are around in 2018, and that of those, about 15 million, close to 20% are what's phrased as childless. About a third of Americans between 45 and 62 identify as single, as compared to about a fifth of folks in 1980. This is the statistic you often hear most repeated and cited. A quarter of baby boomers did not have kids. And it's estimated about a third or so of older adults are at likely risk for solo-ness along a continuum. And we'll get into what that is later in our talk.
Yes, and Aileen, I just wanted to add again, Susan, thank you so much for inviting us to do this today, and thank you all for joining us. I too am extremely passionate regarding this particular subject and in really helping people who fall into this category. And we're going to talk a lot about really who is part of this solo ager, and it's a much broader definition, I think, than many people realize. But really important to understand these statistics and to put them into some kind of context, because the individuals who are really being labeled as solo agers is a much larger demographic, I think, than many of us understand. And as Aileen said, that comes with both incredible benefits. There are lots of wonderful attributes to people who are solo agers, including that fierce independence. But as we age, it also brings challenges. And these are the things that we really want to begin to talk about, because I think both Aileen and I believe very strongly that power and our knowledge and education around this really bring power to the individual and really help them to take control as much as they possibly can throughout the aging process. Absolutely. So Aileen, why don't we go ahead, if we could, and start talking about really what is this definition of the solo ager?
Right. So when it comes to solo aging, I think that sometimes it's referred to as a definition, a framework. Sometimes I refer to it as a slice of the demographic, right? We have to put in some parameters, but we're not categorizing anyone, right? We're just going with some identifiable characteristics. So when we talk about solo agers, we're talking about an aging senior who's 55 plus, without a reliable support system. And that's the key. The support system is really the piece that tells the story. So those folks may or may not be married or partnered. They didn't have children, or they had children, but unfortunately have outlived children, are estranged from children. Children either live far away or are unable or unwilling to assist, or there's a complicated family dynamic. And often folks live on their own.
Right.
So that compass is really a snapshot. Kathleen?
No, I was going to say too, Aileen, it can be, solo ager as well, someone who has experienced the loss of a partner recently, now finds themselves in a very different situation. Also, it could be someone who is still in some kind of a partnered relationship, but possibly that partner is experiencing things like dementia, and not able to be an active participant as part of what Aileen really said was the reliable support system. I think that really is kind of the key to the definition or to this slice of this demographic, as to who really we're talking about when we're talking about solo agers. And, we often find that it can even be, as Aileen said, people who do have children. It's not always the childless, but people's lives are busy. People are scattered all over the country. It is who is your people, who are the reliable support system that is around you. And oftentimes it's the more immediately around you, because as much as we've increased communication, been able to now, get information passed back and forth about things and be able to communicate with someone who may live across the country, even around the world, it really does come down to oftentimes day-to-day needs, as we're talking about solo agers, and how that support system is going to help them age successfully. So it is a much larger definition than just someone who is either not married or doesn't have children, or a combination of both and lives by themselves, et cetera. It really can be anyone who does not believe, for a multitude of reasons, that they have a reliable support system that they can immediately turn to.
Absolutely.
So when Aileen, in talking about who our solo agers are, I think one of the things that you and I both have talked a lot about is once, people begin to take a look, and part of it is, again, looking at yourself, looking at if you're a professional who's dealing with this group of individuals, being able to start to ask the right questions of both ourselves and of the people who we may serve if we're a professional, to really discern what someone's support system looks like. And I know we're going to give a little bit of homework in all of this as well that will help to walk people through that. But this is something that people need to begin to focus on. Whether you're self-identifying as to whether you may be considered a solo ager, and how you might be able to begin to take control over things for yourself, or whether you're someone who is serving this population. Asking the right questions, I think, is critical.
Right, and also keeping in mind that there's a real intentionality in planning, that ideally all of us should be thinking about planning, right? That is not unique to any slice of the demographic. But when you think about who makes up our support system, if there are gaps, we need to intentionally fill those gaps, or help our clients or our community members, depending on what role brings you to the top today. And that piece is really critical. Should we go ahead and look at those different areas going
Absolutely.
forward?
Absolutely. But Aileen, I did want to reiterate exactly what you just said, which was that it's about intentionality here in terms of, we talk about planning, and we're going to talk about that more as we get to the next slide. But it is critically important for this particular group of individuals to be very intentional in order to, as we'll talk about, maintain control, ensure that, proper decision makers, people you want to be part of your life, are the ones who are there. And as professionals serving, being very intentional in terms of identifying people who really fit into this grouping. So why don't we go ahead and start to talk about now, Aileen, you have put together, and I think it's a wonderful approach to really looking at meeting the needs of solo agers, and by really identifying the areas, and I believe, Aileen, you've identified 8 areas that we're going to talk about, and how the questions that people should be asking themselves, or again, for people who are serving this population, the things that they should be looking at.
Great. So as Kathleen framed very nicely, there are 8 components of support that adult family members or adult children tend to provide as someone ages. And so again, going back to that intentionality, as we're looking at these 8 pieces, for some of you who have joined it, who have been on a talk with me before, this is just reinforcement. You've seen this slide before, but it's always good to have reinforcement. But these 8 pieces are the different aspects of the planning components. And really, as we go through them, as Kathleen suggested, think about where you are now. And if there are gaps along the way, we're going to give you some homework, very light homework, but homework nonetheless. To think about where you are and where the gaps are. And then for our next session in March, we'll be able to talk about some resources to engage with. So why don't I put all 8 of them up and then we'll go through them one by one. Does that sound good? So healthcare decision-making, emotional support, help with needs of daily living, financial support, the where to live conversation, either where I'm living now or where I want to be living, bill paying and financials, managing real estate matters, and legal matters. So those are the 8 pieces. Should we start with healthcare decision making? A favorite of mine, and I know Kathleen, one for you as well. So one of the things that can be challenging is if you feel there's a gap in a support system related to being able to identify someone who can serve as your healthcare agent / healthcare proxy, there's a chance that either an individual may not fill out those documents, or as a professional, your client or community members aren't filling out those documents. And that is a real barrier to planning for obvious reasons. And so often people ask me as an independent board certified patient advocate, who can play that role for me? Can you play that role for me? And currently I cannot. That may be changing due to our ethics, but currently I cannot. But then my opportunity is to then engage other professionals in the community who can. And I know that's a role, Kathleen, you play for clients and can speak more about that. And also just fleshing out any kind of advanced care directive that not only once you've identified your healthcare agent, your proxy, or power of attorney, depending on which phrase someone wants to use for it, but it's really important to have a conversation about what is desired with that individual. It's not enough to just put that name down on paper. I'm sure, Kathleen, you have much more to say on that.
Yeah, but Aileen, you're absolutely correct. So we're in Massachusetts, although I know people may be coming from many different areas, but in Massachusetts, we specifically, our healthcare directives are related to the naming of a proxy. And so we look to actually appoint an individual to make healthcare decisions. And the interesting thing about our whole healthcare proxy law is that it doesn't provide specifics about what your wishes are with respect to healthcare. So having that important conversation, and it's interesting, you had said, Eileen, that these are issues that all of us face regardless of our situation. But for solo agers in particular, maintaining again that ability to keep control where you can, make sure that your wishes, your desires around issues regarding your healthcare are known. It's critical that you go ahead and get in place a healthcare decision-making document like a proxy and really have, again, that conversation. We'll probably talk a little bit more about this when we get to legal matters, but I'm often in a position where we find somebody doesn't have a healthcare proxy in place, a crisis occurs. Once the crisis occurs, and if you lose your ability to manage your own decision-making because you become incompetent or incapacitated for some reason, these decisions now are out of your control. And oftentimes you're then put in a position of having someone who is court appointed making these decisions. And remember, these documents, even whether you have them in place or not, don't give us a framework about what's important to you. So critical that you do some really deep dive thinking about your healthcare wishes. What would be important if you couldn't make these decisions for yourself? Who you want to make those decisions and the framework for them to make those decisions in. So it's a lot to be thinking about. And one of the things that we don't want to have happen here, if it's okay for me to say that from the beginning, is we don't want people to be so overwhelmed. I mean, that's part of why we're doing this in steps with people, because right now it's talking about the information. And I don't want people to walk away saying, it's just too much, I don't feel I can take the steps. We want you to begin to understand why it's important and then begin to chunk out, like they say, you eat the elephant one bite at a time. And you start to take a look at this and say, what can I do to make small steps to ensure that what is important to me, what my wishes are known and supported as I age?
Absolutely. So that leads us into emotional support. And the whole component of our support system in general, and who can we connect with in decision making, in sharing individual thoughts. And the reality is we can never have too many people in that octagon. It's really critical that you have support and emotional support from folks in all different kinds of ways, and that there's a consideration in this, these 8 subjects in general, that you think about who are all the people that I connect with, either closely as close relationships or even as acquaintance relationships. And are there ways to make some connections beyond that? So that's something to think about. Well, when it comes to emotional support, we certainly know in all of the articles and all of the discussions, certainly throughout the pandemic, it was amplified significantly, that piece of emotional support and the impact of isolation and of not being as connected with each other in person. As humans, we benefit from significantly. So it's really thinking about who plays those roles for me now. What are the things in which I'm connected, book clubs, other kinds of things, mailing lists, whatever, opportunities to engage with others that really can help me solidify my emotional support system as well.
Absolutely. And Aileen, you talked about the pandemic, and it really did cause so many changes and so many challenges for many of us. But it also did provide some new opportunities, and to be able to make sure that you're taking advantage where you can of those opportunities. Things like this, having a whole different way now of being able to share information. And when we're talking about emotional support too, being able to stay connected. And there are lots of ways to stay connected, including, although, certainly we know that it doesn't take the place of oftentimes in-person kind of support systems, but there are ways to be able to connect in a much broader way these days with, being able to participate in even, exercise classes online and other things, whether your hobbies, whether it be painting or knitting, crocheting, et cetera, book clubs, all of those now are happening in a different way, and being open to reaching out and growing that your support system that way as well.
Which also can impact the needs of assistance in terms of daily living, both individual needs in terms of just being able to room, hygiene, get dressed, all of those things, often referred to as activities of daily living, ADLs, but also just in general about keeping a routine, medication management, staying connected and having emotional support does have an impact on whether people stay on medications routinely, whether they feel connected enough in terms of someone knowing their whereabouts, well, those things, and being able to talk with folks about what kind of help may be needed now or possibly down the road, and be prepared to know what kind of resources may be available to you. And we'll certainly talk about those in the next month, but we wanted to give you a chance to give some thought to it now.
One of the things, Aileen, that I see often in my practice and when dealing with individuals as they're aging in particular, this the needs of daily living and the openness to accepting help in this area. That is a huge barrier for many of us. It's a huge challenge for many of us to be willing to not only be able to recognize when we need help here, but to be willing to accept that help as we age. And so that's another thing that I think takes some critical thinking for each of us as to what barriers are we putting in our own way in this area of accepting help when we need it.
Absolutely.
Right.
Shall we combine although in life we shouldn't combine financial decision making and bill paying and financials?
Aileen, very quickly, before we move on, there was a question about proxies in most forms.
Most forms.
Yeah.
Can we circle back and answer that at the end? Most forms, which are
sure. Proxy and most forms.
Yeah, we'll talk about both of those.
Yes. So it's a good question. But for the sake of time, we're gonna look at, instead of combine, we're going to look at both financial decision making and bill paying and financials together, and knowing who the resources are, knowing what your current resources are, what your plans are, what your costs are, effectively organizing a budget if that has not yet been something you've needed to do, but really having a true sense of where you are, and then meeting with knowledgeable professionals, financial advisors, daily money managers, financial planners, et cetera, who can, in partnership with the folks you meet with about legal and possibly a patient advocate, or somebody who does care management, if that's where you are in your need level, to make sure that the whole picture is really clear for you, and to make sure that even if these are things that today you're able to make sure are in order for bill paying and organizing financials, that going back to Kathleen's point about will your wishes be honored, will your desires be taken care of if you are unable to advocate for yourself. And these are two pieces that are also in that component of consideration.
Right.
Kathleen, do you have stuff to add?
Absolutely. And this is a place from a legal standpoint where we see the importance of Again, putting in place legal documentation to support your financial decision making. And to be able to also to make sure that someone can physically do things like pay bills and to manage your financial decisions should you not be able to do so yourself. This is really what we call a durable power of attorney. This is a very broad-based document that gives a tremendous amount of authority to another of your choosing to be able to step into your shoes to manage your financial house should you be unable to do so for yourself. There are some other ways of doing that too, and we can touch a little bit about it, probably bringing in the legal matters now. You'll see that these areas really do intersect so frequently. Things like trusts and being a trustee, or having someone be a subsequent trustee or successor trustee, should you again not be able to manage things for yourself. You know, we talk about, estate planning with people, and it's one thing to be planning after you have died. That's certainly important to do. But I often talk with people about the importance of making sure you're planning while you're alive. This is for your living. This is for your life. And so taking the time to make sure that you have identified people who you have faith and confidence in, their ability to be able to step in and help you with these things should you not be able to do so for yourself. And Aileen, as you said, we have to be able to give these people framework, very much like the healthcare decision making. If we don't know from a financial standpoint where things are for ourselves, what's important to us, whether if you're somebody who being involved in charitable organizations and giving and that kind of thing has been important all throughout your life, you certainly want those things, if feasible and possible, to still be supported if you're not able to do so on your own, let's say. Or let's say you're thinking about, can I continue to live where I'm living? Can I continue to be in this environment that I'm currently in, if that's your choice? Knowing your financial house and understanding what your finances are is going to be critical to determining whether that's going to be supported in the future. So again, having that framework around financial decisions, just like you do around healthcare decisions, is really, really important. And that begins by understanding first where you are for yourself and how things are moving forward as you're managing them yourself. So you can give that framework to someone else who may be stepping into your shoes.
Right. The where to live conversation is an interesting one in terms of the whole process of this information. Intentional planning is ideal for everyone, and why it's critically important for folks who identify as solos. But it also really gives people the opportunity to say, when it comes to where I want to live, continue where I am, and benefit from resources in place to do so, or think about the various options that are out there for me. There is currently the statistics, the data is showing that people want to age. The phrase is age in place. I have to be perfectly honest and say that sounds stagnant to me. And so I say age in community, which is more dynamic, but I totally respect that the phrase is age in place. But that doesn't always work for solos the way it works for other models of families. So it can further isolation. It may not provide the same resources that it might for someone who has adult family members or other members of a support system. So it's really important to be aware of all of the different types of housing choices, from staying where one is and being able to assess if that's realistic and cost effective and all of that, to some creative options like co-housing, shared housing, what's commonly referred to now as the Golden Girls model, something called NORCs, which are naturally occurring retirement communities where people tend to all choose to live in the same place, and they've created their own informal community. And then what I refer to as conventional traditional models. And there's lots of information out there. We could certainly spend more than an hour discussing those specifically. But it's really important that those are like any other decision making, those pros and cons not only need to be researched, but need to be discussed with others. So if that's something you're thinking about right now, it's really important to seek out professionals who can have those conversations, as well as acquaintances, friends, extended family members, et cetera, who can help share their feedback of, looking at different communities, or I heard my friend so-and-so just moved, et cetera. But really using as many resources as possible to make the best decision for you going forward, with the most important piece of looking to see where things are right now for you, and then where you think you might want to make changes, or you might need some additional support in terms of where you live.
I love the comment that was put in the chat box about calling it an independent lifestyle design. I think that's wonderful. And one of the things that we often, talk with people about is we don't want you to wait for crises to occur before you begin to, look at these things. This is the time to think about where to live, to think about that independent lifestyle design and put it together. To be able to critically look at what is your current situation, where are you living now, what does your community have to offer, is it meeting your needs, what else is out there? Use this time to explore while you are healthy, doing well. Use this time to explore, so that as you're building that design, that independent lifestyle design, that you are really using the information without being clouded by some kind of a crisis situation that can really affect your thinking and limit your options. And that's really what we're trying to avoid as much as possible, that any next step that might be taken is somehow out of your control. Now, we can't always avoid that, but the more that you have been clear for yourself as to what, if a next step is necessary or wanted, what that would look like, the more in control you are as that next step occurs. And so that's really what the whole point of where to live and the decisions that may come around that is, keeping that within your frame of desire, of reference, of what's important to you as you continue through the aging process.
Kathleen, do you want to start off on legal matters? This is definitely your lane, and I only learn from others.
Well, again, legal matters, whether you're calling it estate planning, really, this is the opportunity to be able to make sure what's important to you is what's memorialized in documents. As I said, there's kind of two pieces to it as I see it. One is what happens after you've passed away, after you've died. That's one piece, but that doesn't affect you as you're living. And I did see we skipped over the real estate matters. We'll bring that definitely back into it again. But as you're living, we really don't want the importance of what's critical to you to be avoided and to be not known. And that's, again, going back to that financial decision-making, the healthcare decision-making. Make sure you have in place your healthcare directives. Again, in Massachusetts, it's specifically a proxy. Also, making sure that you have a HIPAA authorization and release form in place so that you have it clear who can speak with your healthcare providers, being part of your team, your emotional support, those who are part of your network, and so they can be on the same page when talking with healthcare providers. And the financial piece of it, making sure that your powers of attorney are in place. We want to avoid court involvement and having guardianships and conservatorships now put in place, in which you no longer are part of that decision-making and have no control over who ends up being appointed. So thinking about not only what happens after you die, but what happens while you're living, and really making that the priority for you is, how is living going to be handled should you not be able to do so for yourself? Someone had asked about the MOLST and the proxy forms. And so, the proxy form is, again, specific to Massachusetts, the naming of someone to step into your shoes to make healthcare decisions. The MOLST form is a very interesting document. This is what they call medical orders for life-sustaining treatment. I like to think of it like a prescription. It is a document that you fill out with your healthcare provider, with your physician, not with your attorney, that goes through very specific decision-making about, in particular, end-of-life decisions, about the use of things like ventilators, whether you want to have feeding tubes, whether you want to be resuscitated, those kinds of decisions. And it's like a prescription. So it's signed by your physician after conversations with you and determining what's important to you. And it can then follow you from any community, any facility that you may be in, so that it is honored in terms of your wishes. Now, one thing I find about MOLSTs is they tend not to be done with otherwise healthy individuals, because really it's talking about end of life decision making. So,
Right.
If you're otherwise healthy and you have a heart attack, they're going to go ahead and resuscitate you. That wouldn't be something where you would say, I don't want to be resuscitated. It's typically for people who are in end stage in terms of some kind of a disease process, whether that be some kind of an acute illness or whether it be a long-standing chronic illness. And sometimes physicians will do it based on age. Very subjective. What that age is going to be very, very dependent on the different individuals. But it tends again to be someone who's very advanced in age, and the decision with their physician to put that in place.
So if you want to talk about that form, the MOLST form, which, as Kathleen pointed out, is triggered often in conversation with a provider over serious illness and isn't a general form. We in Massachusetts tend to change the names of things, and we did so with the MOLST form. Nationwide, it is called a POLST form. So if you are talking to somebody and they have no idea in another state what you're talking about, I'm a big believer in speaking the same language. That is what the form is called, a POLST. And I also make a plea that when it comes to healthcare decision-making documents, that they are easily accessible. They can be kept somewhere else under a mattress, in a safe deposit box, in your attorney's office as part of your larger estate plan. But that shouldn't be the only place it should be. Those documents should be easily accessible, as I like to refer to it, easily able to be pulled off of a bookcase or out of a file, coordinated, and that the person you've assigned as your proxy, remember, a proxy is just someone who stands in for someone else, and someone else has already identified their decisions. A proxy is not a decision maker in the decisions of origin. They are ideally carrying out your wishes. So it's important to keep that in mind as well. But please, 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 if you know me, you know this is sincere and earnest. Please don't hide those documents. Please have them easily accessible, very different than a will and other legal documents, in which those should be, put in different locations. But the pieces of who your emergency contact, your medication list, what I like to refer to as what you'd keep in a go bag in an emergency. And I have a checklist on my website if that'll be helpful. All of those pieces should be easily accessible and able to just be taken with you. And whoever you've assigned as your proxy, emergency contact, etc., should have a copy of those easily accessible documents as well, so that they're able, should the need be, to be able to immediately serve as your agent.
So we have
Critical point, Aileen.
we have
Absolutely critical. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
We have a question about, can the MOLST form be used in other states, for example, New Hampshire? Or is there a different form, the one you just mentioned, or are they just different names? for the same
I
form?
believe it's really a different name, and Aileen had said it's a PULSE, which is physician's order for life-sustaining treatment. In Massachusetts, we call it the MOLST. Right. But let us not skip over this managing real estate matters, because it is actually another critical part, and it does play a lot. Again, all of these are so intertwined in terms of the different things that people need to think about. But again, certainly it goes to the question of, your current living situation and whether that is going to be an appropriate one for you, or whether you're going to need to be thinking about some kind of a change, or want to think about some kind of a change in terms of your current living situation. Whether you're able to, and Aileen, this may go more to the heart of what you're talking about, managing your current home where you're living. Can you actually manage that home? Those of us who are in the Northeast and still dealing with the cold and the snow, et cetera, we have a whole different set of things that we have to think about in terms of where we're living and how we're managing that. And so you want to make that part of your overall thinking about your real estate itself. Aileen, I don't know if you have other things you want to add to that.
I think you summed it up fantastically.
Right. It really has to do, where you're currently living, and taking a look at, can you actually handle that? Can you handle the work that goes into, let's say you're in a single family home somewhere, there's a certain level of care that has to be done, of constant maintenance that has to be done for that, as opposed to potentially living in a different type of community setting in which some of those services may be provided for you. And making sure from a legal standpoint, again, it goes back to the documentation, the power of attorney in particular for the financial decision-making. That document also names the person who you'd want to handle your real estate, even to the point of selling your real estate, if appropriate, on your behalf. And so making sure that you have, again, identified someone who you have confidence in and understands what's important to you.
So looking at the time, there are a couple of more questions and comments in the chat. And then I thought maybe we could talk about homework and open it up to questions. Okay. One of the questions is, when is it safe and how to initiate the DPOA so you or an elder are not a victim of financial abuse?
So this is referring to that durable power of attorney, the document in which you're naming someone to step into your shoes to manage all decision-making but healthcare, and it's really that financial tool. And the individual who made that comment is absolutely correct. This is an extremely powerful document. Now, we can put some safeguards on this document. It's called making the document springing, meaning that it's required first that a physician declare you incompetent, and you can decide, is that one physician? Is that two physicians who must declare you incompetent before the individual that you've asked to be in that position can act. Now, that is a good check and balance in the sense that the power of attorney then requires this extra step before it becomes effective, but it also can become a barrier. We are finding that it is becoming more and more difficult for physicians to be willing to write those letters of incompetence. And it requires that individual who you've asked to step into your shoes to have to go through these extra steps first. So one of the critical things about a power of attorney to begin with is choosing someone that you have confidence and utmost faith in. And that is a difficult thing to do. I recognize that. And it is a document that provides a tremendous amount of authority. So.
Great, thank you. And then there's a comment here that says, ideally give someone as for example, your proxy, access to your patient portal.
That's absolutely one way, making sure information is shared.
Right, that person is sharing it. It's a colleague. an outstanding colleague who's also a patient advocate and also a physician. And that comes from making sure that people have access to all different, that you make the choice, not just giving people blanket opportunity, but that you make the choice of who has access to what information. But the process of designating someone authorized to get information from an online portal is quite cumbersome. So the easiest way is to have that built into your plan to begin with. And I'm guessing that's part of where that suggestion came from.
Okay, should we move on to homework? Aileen, would you like to put that slide up for us and explain it? And then we'll
Sure.
take more questions.
So the slide, I didn't actually include the actual slide, but the slide is to take these 8 components. We have a PDF we've created. The link is on the next slide, and I'll show you that in a second. We'll also put it in chat. But is to take these 8 components and think about who helps me now, or who helps a client now, or work with a community member, whatever your access point is to this conversation, and really give some good thought to that and see if there are places where there are gaps. If there are needs on all of them, that's okay too. As Kathleen said at the beginning, and so did Susan, the idea is not to be overwhelmed. It's to be able to feel empowered to take these steps to fill in some of the gaps and to be intentional going forward. So the slide looks just like this, except there are some lines and our contact information on it. But it literally says who helps me now for each one of these things, so that you have some reflective opportunity to give some thought to that. The slide can be downloaded right from my website. That's the link. We will drop it also in chat as well, so you can just click and go straight. And our contact information is at the bottom of this.
Excellent. So if anyone would like to unmute themselves and ask a question, and if you don't want to ask it and you want to type it in the chat, that's fine as well.
I have a couple of questions. Is it reasonable to include in the healthcare proxy form one's preferences that you seem to refer to as being in the most? So it's all in one form saying, I would like full resuscitation unless, 3 doctors determine that I'm brain dead forever, or something like that. Is that to include that in the healthcare proxy? Is it okay to include it in the healthcare proxy, and does it carry weight if you say, and I would like my healthcare proxy and his wife to be able to see my medical records and speak to the doctor the same as I would?
So I can only speak, thank you for that question. I can only speak to what happens here in Massachusetts. So one thing to know, specifically in Massachusetts, our proxy law is just providing authority to the person that you've named to step into your shoes. So the proxy document, we don't, as a healthcare system, we don't turn to the proxy document to find out what should happen in a specific circumstance. We instead turn to the person that you have named in that document and ask them to make the decision. So the proxy law and the proxy document just provides authority. It does not provide anything specific. And so adding the specifics certainly wouldn't have legal weight in terms of the ultimate decision made. Now, this is where the conversation with your proxy is so critical. Sitting down, talking with that person. We also, if anyone has, we have an ability, or we have on our website, if someone would like to see, we have an ebook about talking with people, how to start these conversations about what's important to you, because that's really going to be the thing that ensures that your proxy is making the decisions based on what you would want to have done.
They may not always remember all the details, and I'm wondering, would a doctor look at the extra information in the healthcare proxy and say, well, this patient seems to want these things, and the healthcare proxy seems to be saying something slightly different. Let me check with the healthcare proxy, if he really means that, versus, oh, I blindly just follow the healthcare proxy. I'm not going to read any forms or anything, and the healthcare proxy, while well-intentioned, may not have all this, in their mind. I know my healthcare proxy has somewhat different views for their own life, though I trust them to try to do the best relative for my preferences, but they still could, are human.
Right. But ideally, again, it's not the proxy that's going to end up, it's the proxy themselves who will end up making the decision, not the form. And that's what I see, is that the healthcare system does not turn to the form for direction other than to identify the person who will be making those decisions. And this is why it's, again, critical that you're choosing someone who, even if they have a different, ideological approach to things, that they will follow your wishes. That's what's critical about the person that you choose. I think the biggest issue that I find is that when a healthcare proxy is evoked, and it must be evoked or activated before it becomes put in play, which means that you are no longer in a situation where you are deemed to be able to make your own healthcare decisions because you're incompetent or incapacitated. At that point, the time and energy isn't spent on looking at the specifics of the document. It's talking with the healthcare proxy and having them involved in whatever the critical decision-making is. And so, certainly documents, things that you can provide to your proxy to help give them guidance. There are, Aileen may have other resources. I mean, people know about things like the 5 wishes that are out there, that kind of thing can help to give some guidance. But it really, when it comes down to the actual decision-making, it will be that they turn to the individual and say, what do we do here?
Okay, we have a few other questions. Nancy, I noticed you had raised your hand.
I raised my hand. It was a great presentation. Thank you so much, Aileen and Kathleen. The other form when we're helping people is being the designated authorized representative for like the different health plans. So if you want access to the portals and stuff, the client has to give you authority. So I just wanted to mention that part. That's always helpful.
Hi, Nancy.
Thank you,
Thank
Nancy.
you.
We do find that sometimes comes into play with different financial institutions as well, that, you'll have a power of attorney in play, but they'll have their own authorizations that they'll be looking to have completed.
But if there's somebody who identifies as a solo ager or might identify, it might be good for them to connect with folks who we're doing a lot of different solo aging programming, as well as creating resources that we share with folks. So encourage them to connect to a larger community. We're trying to fill the gap regarding resources for solo agers and make sure solos know they're seen and heard and valued.
Absolutely.
Great. Are there any more questions? No? Well, I think we've filled the hour. Thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate it. Take care.